Have you ever wondered why some believers pray and give, yet their lives are full of lack, while others, with the same faith, live in overflowing abundance? Tonight, I'm going to reveal a secret hidden in the Psalms that wealthy believers never share. A secret that could change the way you see God, money, and blessing forever. Friends, the world tells us that wealth is about hard work, luck, or inheritance. But the Bible tells a different story. In the Psalms, there's a principle so powerful that it separates those who simply pray for blessings from those who live in divine abundance. It's a principle that wealthy believers know, but most never teach. If you've ever struggled financially, if you've ever wondered why your faith isn't producing the results you hope for, this message is for you. By the time we finish today, you will not only understand this hidden secret, but you will also be equipped to apply it in your life immediately. I urge you, listen carefully and take this to heart, because missing this could cost you the fullness of God's blessing. When we talk about wealth and abundance, many immediately think of strategy, hard work, or the right opportunity. The world teaches us to rely on skill, timing, and sometimes even luck to gain financial stability. But there is a deeper principle, hidden in the scriptures, that far surpasses human understanding. A principle that separates believers who struggle from believers who live in supernatural abundance. That principle is faithful obedience. And it is not merely obedience in a casual sense. I am talking about a level of obedience that aligns your heart, your actions, and your daily choices with the will of God, regardless of what the world says or circumstances demand. It is a commitment to walk in faith, even when the blessing is not yet visible, and it is a secret that many wealthy believers hold close to their hearts. Faithful obedience is more than performing religious rituals or following rules. It is an inner posture of trust that God's ways are higher than our ways, and that His timing is perfect. In the Psalms, we see repeated emphasis on living righteously, on praising God consistently, and on giving generously. The psalmist declares that those who walk in the ways of the Lord, who honor Him with their resources and their time, are blessed abundantly. But here is the subtlety. This blessing is not always immediate. It is not always visible to the human eye. The wealthy believers understand that obedience does not demand instant reward. It demands consistency, faith, and a willingness to act even when the outcome seems uncertain. They have discovered that faith without obedience is like a seed planted in dry soil. It may have potential, but it cannot grow. Consider the example of giving. Many believers give only when they feel like it, when it is convenient, or when they expect a direct return. But the wealthy believers operate differently. They give as an act of obedience, without concern for immediate reward. They understand that God's economy is not like the world's economy. In the Psalms, it is written that those who give faithfully and cheerfully are rewarded in ways that are beyond human calculation. The act of giving itself is a declaration of trust, a spiritual seed planted into fertile soil. It is through this obedience, through giving not because of pressure, but because of faith, that doors begin to open. Opportunities arise, favor is multiplied, and the invisible hand of God moves on their behalf. The principle here is clear. Obedience unlocks favor. It is a law as real as any natural law. But faithful obedience is not limited to giving. It extends to every area of life. It includes how we treat others, how we manage our time, and how we respond to trials. In the Psalms, the righteous are described as those whose hearts are aligned with God, whose words reflect truth, and whose actions reflect integrity. Wealthy believers know that no amount of talent or intelligence can replace a heart that is fully surrendered. They act in ways that honor God, even when it is costly, inconvenient, or misunderstood by others. They understand that every small act of obedience is recorded in heaven. And over time, these acts compound to produce extraordinary results. It is in the quiet consistency of obeying God daily, through prayer, through integrity, through service, that the foundation for lasting wealth and blessing is built. Faithful obedience also requires humility. One cannot demand blessings while ignoring God's instructions or while thinking oneself superior to His wisdom. The psalmist repeatedly contrasts the proud with the humble, showing that pride blocks favor while humility attracts it. Wealthy believers never presume upon God's mercy. They do not treat obedience as a transaction, expecting blessings simply because they have performed certain acts. Rather, they cultivate a heart that delights in God's presence, that seeks to align with His purposes, and that trusts in His timing. This humility creates a spiritual atmosphere in which favor can flourish, where divine opportunities are recognized, and where supernatural provision flows. It is important to note that obedience does not mean passivity. Faithful obedience is active. It requires discernment, courage, and sometimes stepping out into situations that seem risky. The wealthy believers do not wait for perfect conditions. They move with faith, trusting God to honor their commitment to His word. In the Psalms, we see this principle echoed again and again. Those who act in alignment with God's commands are lifted up, their steps ordered, and their work prospered. They understand that delay is not denial. Even when circumstances appear difficult, even when resources are limited, obedience is the key that opens the door to breakthrough. Another critical aspect of faithful obedience is the recognition of God's sovereignty. Wealthy believers understand that their actions are not isolated from God's plan. They do not rely solely on human wisdom or effort. They act in accordance with divine guidance. Every decision, every investment of time or resources, every act of service is filtered through prayer and reflection on God's word. This alignment with God's will ensures that their obedience produces not just temporary gain, but lasting impact. It ensures that wealth once received is preserved, multiplied, and used for purposes greater than themselves. Obedience becomes the conduit through which God's favor flows continuously, creating a cycle of blessing that cannot be explained by human reasoning alone. Faithful obedience also requires perseverance. Many believers start well, but falter when results are delayed. The wealthy believers, however, remain steadfast. They understand that God's blessing often comes incrementally through sustained obedience, and that each act of faith compounds over time. Just as a farmer must patiently tend the soil, water the seeds, and wait for the harvest, so must a believer maintain faithful obedience until the full measure of blessing arrives. This perseverance is fueled by a deep trust in God, a recognition that His promises are true even when unseen, and a commitment to remain faithful in both abundance and scarcity. In conclusion, the principle of faithful obedience is the first key to unlocking divine favor. It is not about human effort alone. It is about aligning one's heart and actions with God's will, acting consistently in faith, giving generously without expectation, walking in integrity, cultivating humility, moving courageously, and persevering through challenges. Wealthy believers understand that it is this obedience, repeated faithfully over time, that opens the doors to supernatural provision, divine opportunities, and lasting abundance. Obedience transforms potential into reality, faith into tangible blessing, and ordinary believers into vessels of extraordinary favor. Gratitude is a simple word, yet it carries a spiritual weight that many believers overlook. In the journey of faith, it is not enough to pray and give. The heart must cultivate thanksgiving as a lifestyle. The psalmist repeatedly emphasizes the importance of giving thanks, not only in moments of blessing, but also in seasons of trial. Wealthy believers understand that gratitude is not merely an expression of good manners. It is a spiritual key, a principle that activates favor, multiplies provision, and aligns the soul with God's abundance. They know that a thankful heart is fertile ground for the seeds of prosperity to grow. Many believers struggle because they focus on what is lacking rather than what is already present. They pray with hands outstretched and hearts heavy, waiting for God to fill the emptiness in their lives. While prayer is essential, the Psalms teach us that our posture matters. When we cultivate gratitude, we shift from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance. We begin to recognize that even the smallest provision is a reflection of God's goodness. Wealthy believers practice this daily. They give thanks for what they have, for the opportunities before them, for the lessons in every trial, and for the unseen workings of God's hand. They understand that the spiritual law of thanksgiving is powerful. When you acknowledge God's blessings, you open the door for more blessings to flow. Gratitude is not limited to words alone. It is expressed in attitude, in the way one speaks, in the way one approaches challenges, and in the choices one makes. The psalmist often writes, "I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart," which reveals that thanksgiving is not superficial. It is a deep inward alignment with God's presence and purposes. Wealthy believers live this truth. Even when circumstances seem contrary, even when financial pressures mount, they maintain a heart of praise and gratitude. This does not mean they ignore reality, but rather they choose to focus on God's faithfulness instead of temporary difficulties. They have discovered that the moment gratitude becomes a habit, favor begins to follow, opportunities arise, and even challenges transform into stepping stones for growth. One of the most overlooked aspects of gratitude is its connection to faith. Faith and gratitude are inseparable in the life of a prosperous believer. When we give thanks in advance, thanking God for the provision we have not yet received, we demonstrate that we trust His timing and His promises. This is a radical act of faith because it acknowledges God's ability to act before we see the result. The psalmist writes about praising God in the night, in the moments of uncertainty, and this is exactly what wealthy believers do. They do not wait for abundance to arrive before expressing gratitude. They give thanks in anticipation. In doing so, they create a spiritual momentum that pulls blessings toward them, just as the wind carries a sailboat forward when it is set in the right direction. Gratitude also transforms the way we perceive wealth itself. Many believers view resources as something to hoard, control, or protect, but the Psalms reveal that wealth, when acknowledged as a gift from God, is meant to flow through hands of faithfulness. Those who are thankful for their blessings naturally become generous. Gratitude softens the heart, opens the hand, and prepares the soul to receive even greater abundance. It is no coincidence that the psalmist pairs thanksgiving with generosity. The wealthy believer understands that a heart filled with gratitude is never stingy. They see their resources not as possessions to cling to, but as instruments to fulfill God's purposes. Through this gratitude-driven generosity, the cycle of blessing continues, multiplying far beyond human calculation. Another powerful element of gratitude is its ability to release spiritual favor. The psalmist declares that those who give thanks in all circumstances invite God's presence into their lives. Presence brings guidance, provision, and peace. Wealthy believers know that gratitude is a magnet for divine favor. When they walk into a room, when they speak in business meetings, when they engage with others in ministry or community, the atmosphere they carry is one of thankfulness. This attracts opportunities, alliances, and ideas that others might miss. Gratitude is not passive, it is active. It shapes relationships, shapes decisions, and shapes outcomes. It aligns the believer with God's providential plan, and in doing so, it positions them to receive blessings that cannot be earned by human effort alone. Even in seasons of trial, Gratitude maintains the believer's connection to God's abundance. Life is not always easy, challenges are inevitable. But the psalmist continually reminds us that even in valleys, we can offer thanks. Wealthy believers do not wait for life to be perfect before expressing gratitude. They thank God for His presence, for lessons learned, and for the faith that sustains them. This daily practice develops resilience, fortifies faith, and keeps the spiritual channels open. The moment gratitude is abandoned, the focus shifts to lack, fear, and frustration. But when gratitude is sustained, it becomes a force that shapes reality, attracting provision and transforming circumstances. Gratitude is also a form of worship, and worship is central to the experience of prosperity. In the Psalms, we see a constant pattern. The act of giving thanks is intertwined with praising God's name, worshiping God for what He has already done, even before seeing new results, magnifies His presence and power in our lives. Wealthy believers understand that every blessing flows from the hand of God, and their constant attitude of gratitude is a recognition of that truth. Worship and thanksgiving are inseparable, and both have a direct impact on spiritual and material abundance. The psalmist calls this a way to enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise, which is essentially an invitation to step into God's favor through a posture of the heart. Finally, gratitude influences mindset and behavior in ways that directly affect prosperity. A thankful heart is a joyful heart, and joy is a magnet for favor. When the believer focuses on what God has done rather than what is missing, creativity, clarity, and wisdom emerge. Decisions are made with discernment, relationships are nurtured, and opportunities are recognized that might otherwise be overlooked. Wealthy believers maintain gratitude as a daily practice, and this practice conditions their spirit to expect favor, to recognize God's provision, and to act in ways that invite multiplication. Gratitude is the lens through which they see possibility, not limitation, abundance, not scarcity, blessing, not lack. Generosity is often spoken of in public terms. People talk about giving, highlight it on social media, or even use it as a measure of status. But the wealthy believers know a hidden secret, one that is written subtly yet powerfully in the Psalms. True generosity is often hidden, unseen, and done in secrecy. The principle of hidden generosity is not about secrecy for the sake of secrecy. It is about aligning with God's kingdom values, where the reward is not always immediate, visible, or recognized by the world, but where God Himself is the one who honors and multiplies the act. In the life of a believer, this principle creates a spiritual dynamic that attracts supernatural favor and opens doors in ways that public recognition cannot replicate. Hidden generosity begins with intention. The wealthy believer gives not to be seen, not to impress, and not to expect applause from human audiences. Instead, they give because they understand that their resources are entrusted to them by God, and that every act of giving is an opportunity to cooperate with God's work on earth. The psalmist speaks of giving from a heart of faith and trust, offering first fruits, tithes, or acts of kindness, knowing that the Lord sees in secret. This secrecy is not a limitation, it is a spiritual strategy. By giving in hidden ways, believers remove the distractions of human opinion and position themselves to receive the fullness of God's reward, which is often far greater than any immediate acknowledgement. The principle of hidden generosity also protects the blessing. Public giving, while commendable in certain contexts, can sometimes come with strings attached, expectations of recognition, reciprocal favors, or social approval. Hidden generosity, by contrast, frees the giver from these constraints. It allows the act to remain pure, motivated solely by faith and love. Wealthy believers understand that the purity of motive directly affects the potency of the blessing. When generosity is done quietly, God multiplies it openly. It is a divine law of sowing and reaping, one that operates beyond human visibility or calculation. The secret gift, the quiet assistance, the unseen provision. These are the seeds that grow into harvests far beyond what the human eye can measure. Hidden generosity is also transformative to the giver. When we give in secret, we learn to rely entirely on God's recognition rather than human approval. This develops a deeper intimacy with the Lord. Wealthy believers cultivate a mindset that values God's perspective above the world's. They are not discouraged when no one notices their giving, because they know that God is watching and that His reward is perfect. This secret alignment with God's economy produces a peace and joy that public acknowledgement cannot match. It also strengthens faith, as the believer experiences firsthand that God honors what is done for His glory rather than for the applause of men. The Psalms provide numerous examples of this principle. The psalmist often celebrates acts of kindness and generosity that are unseen by others, yet recognized by God. These acts are remembered and multiplied. Wealthy believers study these passages and apply them to their own lives. They do not wait for public recognition or validation. They act according to principle and faith, trusting that God, who sees in secret, will reward openly. This is a critical distinction between ordinary giving and supernatural giving. Ordinary giving may create social approval or temporary satisfaction, but hidden generosity opens the door to enduring favor, provision, and blessing. Hidden generosity also creates an atmosphere of humility. When giving is public, there is a temptation for pride to creep in. The human heart may take credit for the act or become reliant on external validation. Wealthy believers avoid this trap by giving quietly. They understand that true wealth is not measured by what others see, but by what God multiplies. By keeping their generosity hidden, they cultivate humility, which in turn attracts favor. Humility is a magnet for God's blessing because it acknowledges dependence on Him rather than self-sufficiency. The hidden act of giving becomes a spiritual lever, opening doors that pride would close. This principle extends beyond material resources. Hidden generosity can be expressed through time, attention, encouragement, or prayer. Wealthy believers often support ministries, individuals, and projects behind the scenes without seeking acknowledgement. They send anonymous help, make private contributions, or quietly mentor others. In doing so, they create a ripple effect of blessing that cannot be traced directly to them. The impact is multiplied, and God's favor flows back to the giver in unexpected ways. The Psalms teach us that generosity is not limited to wealth, but includes every form of contribution that serves God's purposes. Hidden generosity, therefore, encompasses the heart, actions, and intentions, creating a holistic alignment with God's kingdom. Faithful hidden generosity also builds spiritual resilience. The world may not notice, and human gratitude may be absent, but God's reward is assured. Wealthy believers operate in this assurance. They understand that delayed or unseen reward is not denial, but part of God's perfect timing. By consistently giving in secret, they strengthen their faith, cultivate patience, and maintain an unwavering trust in God's economy. Every quiet act of generosity becomes a spiritual investment, sowed into soil that produces far more than the visible eye can comprehend. They do not seek immediate return because they know that God's multiplication is perfect and often comes in ways that surpass human expectation. Moreover, hidden generosity protects the recipient. Sometimes public giving can embarrass, pressure, or create dependence. Hidden giving, by contrast, allows the recipient to receive with dignity. Wealthy believers understand that the way we give affects the spiritual and emotional outcome for those receiving. Hidden generosity fosters respect, honor, and empowerment. The act becomes a tool of blessing not only for the giver, but also for the recipient. It allows the seed of generosity to grow without the complications of pride, shame, or social expectation. In this way, hidden giving serves multiple purposes. It honors God, blesses the recipient, and positions the giver for multiplication of favor. Hidden generosity also encourages a spirit of expectation in faith. Wealthy believers give quietly, yet they give expectantly. They trust that God sees their offering, appreciates their obedience, and will respond in His perfect way. This expectancy is not based on visible confirmation, but on intimate knowledge of God's character. They know that the Lord, who multiplies seeds sown in secret, will bring an open reward that cannot be replicated by human calculation. This creates a powerful spiritual rhythm. The act of giving strengthens faith. Faith produces expectancy, and expectancy positions the believer to receive favor, provision, and breakthrough beyond what is humanly imaginable. Ultimately, the principle of hidden generosity is a reflection of God's own character. God gives without seeking recognition, pouring out blessings upon creation in ways that often go unnoticed by the world. Wealthy believers mirror this divine pattern. They understand that their role is not to be applauded, but to participate in God's work through obedient, faithful, and hidden acts of generosity. In doing so, they tap into a spiritual law that operates quietly yet powerfully. Their hidden generosity becomes a conduit for God's supernatural multiplication, favor, and blessing.